Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The first, there's a couple housekeeping matters and points of order that we're going to deal with at the outset. First, Mr. Galis wants to address the matter of the question that was left outstanding from his examination.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. Mr. Commissioner, as you recall, you sent me away to talk to my colleagues and do a little review. I've looked at the ruling and the certificate, and I remain of the view that the question is admissible. However, in the interests of bringing some closure to this, I'm content to rely upon the testimony that we've heard already from the DFO representatives, and I'm therefore withdrawing my question.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylor.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, just before Mr. Taylor commences his re-examination, there's a couple of exhibit matters I'd like to deal with. The first, Ms. Gartner had an exhibit that was put in as NNN today. It was marked for identification because she did not have a signed copy of the agreement. She's now provided to me what appears to be a copy of a signed copy. It's been provided to Mr. Taylor. I understand there's no objection to this now becoming a full exhibit, and with the assistance of Ms. Gardner, we'll endeavor to get the signed copy on the website. So if NNN could become a full exhibit, please.
1966.
That's fine, but I thought we were going to put the signed copy in.
Oh, if we have the electronic signed copy, I just thought we were still waiting for the electronic to come in.
I have a hard copy that was provided by my friend Mr. Borsic, Mr. Tyzik from the province. I've provided it to Mr. Lund. There's a hard copy of this signed
But my real
version.
question is, what is the process for getting the signed copy as an exhibit?
Well, he can either scan it and PDF it and mark it, which is something that Mr. Lund is very capable of doing, or I can send him an electronic version.
The practical point is I'm very alive to the fact we're closing the evidence, as I understand it, at 4 o'clock.
If the hard copy
I
could
thought
be marked
someone-
as the next exhibit.
I thought someone was going to send it electronically to Mr. Lund.
If there's no objection to the document itself, I suggest the hard copy be marked and we proceed to scan it and put it on the website in the usual course.
Mr. Commissioner, the very matter about closing the evidence at 4 o'clock, I do want to speak to before 4 o'clock. Because there are, not to suggest any new evidence, but there's some matters that I believe are outstanding that will have to be placed into the body of evidence, isn't currently before the body of evidence, and an example of some decisions that the Commissioner's making on applications that have been made.
At the conclusion of the day, Mr. Commissioner, I'll be suggesting we adjourn until the first day of closing submissions. Subject, of course, to your approval.
Thank you.
So unless Mr. Taylor objects, if the hard copy could be marked as the next exhibit to subsequently be scanned and put on the website.
That would be 1967?
67, that's the one we just had, 66.
66. If we could have Mr. Lapointe's affidavit up. Mr. Commissioner, Commission Council's received an Excel spreadsheet data chart from Mr. Lapointe, Chief Biologist with the Pacific Salmon Commission, which provides sockeye abundance information for a number of years. This fills in some data gaps and some other information previously entered. It's been distributed to all participants. I understand there's no objections. If this affidavit, along with its attachments, could become the next exhibit, please.
That will be 1967.
Thank you. There's I believe, 4 additional documents that follow up on some information that was previously entered in the hydro and water flow and temperature hearings. Mr. Prowse advises he's discussed them with all council, and all council are content to have them go in as exhibits. And I'll just have them identify them so they can be marked as the next exhibits, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Len, the terms of reference, which is dated January 7th, 2003, the Canadian Okanagan Basin Technical Working Group Terms of Reference, if that might be the next exhibit. And then
1968?
The Okanagan Fish Water Management Tool Guidelines for Apprentice Water Managers, Canada 281980. Next exhibit.
1969?
Fish and Water Management Tool Project Assessments, Canada 198280. Next exhibit.
1970?
Upper Columbia Aquatic Management Partnership, Aboriginal Aquatic Resources and Oceans Management Program, Collaborative Management Agreement Quarterly Report, January 1 to March 31, 2007, which is Canada 068981. That might be the next exhibit.
1971?
Thank you, all participants, and thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
I think Mr. McGowan had one more exhibit.
I had planned to deal with that in the course of my re-examination, Mr. Hervey. Mr. Taylor now has a few questions in re-examination.
I'm going to start with what I think Mr. Harvey is referring to, because I wanted to address an aspect of it. So I'll ask if what Mr. McGowan was going to bring up, which must be somewhere in the computer, Mr. Holtby's paper could be brought up. We might as well. Is that what you're asking, Mr. Harvey?
No, it was actually tab 11 in my documents,
Okay,
which
all
was a
right.
DFO publication.
Sorry to be a little disjointed here then. Could we go to Mr. Holtby's paper? I believe Mr. McGowan was going to have it for you, Mr. Lund. This is a document, Mr. Commissioner, that was referred to yesterday by probably Dr. Richards. And then the commission gave notice last night or thereabouts that they were going to put it in as a document, which we're happy to, as an exhibit, which we're happy to see. I'll come back to that when it comes up on the screen. Let me ask you, Mr. Bevan, if I may, about, and Deputy Minister, about the current figures under the current strategic review that's been announced, or the strategic review that's happened and now been announced. I just want to see if we can get some clarity, because I think it's not completely clear by any means after Mr. Rosenblum and Mr. Buchanan were asking you questions about it. There is evidence that over 4 years there will be $56 million trimmed from the DFO budget. And I think I've got that evidence right. Do I, Deputy Minister or Mr. Bevan?
It's $56.8 million will be the final number that it's achieved in terms of the cumulative and then ongoing reductions.
All right.
But it's over 3 years.
Yes, and so the $56 million comes in which year? Or the aggregate is realized, if I could put it that way, in which year or which fiscal year?
At the end of the third year, so 2015, right?
13, 14.
Sorry, yeah.
2013, 14 is the final fiscal year, by which time the budget will have been reduced by $56.8 million on an ongoing basis.
All right. And then backing up from that, I'm just trying to understand and have clarity for the Commissioner what the figure is for each of the previous years.
I know that it's $9 million this year, and I cannot, off the top of my head, with any degree of precision, give you the number for the middle year.
I'm going to do this then, and I'm sorry, Mr. Lunn, I'm bouncing around. I might have been able to accomplish the question I'm on right now without a piece of paper, but I think I'm going to have to go to it. So please don't lose Mr. Holtby. At the same time, can we bring up the document I gave you last night? This morning. It's the one, I think it's the only one we've sent, I hope.
Thank you.
And it's short.
Right.
At least it's short before, in terms of my questioning.
Yes, I know. One more, please.
Yes, thank you. All right, I'll stick with you if I may, Mr. Bevan. Do you recognize that as a cover page for what I'm going to call the second budget 211?
Yes, I do.
All right, and so that would be, as the date shows, the one we're operating, or the one that was ultimately passed, to your knowledge, by the House of Commons?
That's correct.
And if you go to the next page of that document, Mr. Lunn, and if we could see the whole page, do you recognize that page which is listed as 222?
Yes, I do, and those are in fact, the numbers that are to be achieved on the dates by which time they have to be achieved.
All right, and you were, you've already said the 9 and the 56, and you're trying to see or search your memory for the middle number, and does this refresh your memory what
Yes,
that is?
it does. The middle number is 18.9.
All right, and then if I understand it, the year you're in right now, the budget has been trimmed by $9 million, and next year it'll be trimmed by a total of 18, and then 56.8. These are aggregate numbers.
That is correct.
All right. And the 9 million that, the 56 million that is the ultimate number, that's 56 million less on a budget of about 1.8 billion, is it, that we heard about yesterday?
That is correct.
And that's the number that's about 3%. In other words, 56 is about 3% of 1.8 billion.
That's correct.
Thank you. Do you know, either of you, Mr. Bevan or Deputy Minister, whether that kind of percentage, 3%, is more or less than other departments are impacted, of other departments of the federal government?
It's actually, I think, quite average. Some departments were, the full 5% was taken, some departments, a lesser percentage was taken.
Now, Mr. Holtby, and I apologize, it may be Dr. Holtby, I'm not sure. Dr. Richards, do you recognize this?
I don't recall that I've actually read this document, but I am aware of it.
All right, are you aware of it as being a paper that's in draft form, prepared by, and maybe you can help me, Mr. or Dr. Holtby?
It's Dr. Holtby.
Thank you. Is this the paper that he's working on?
I'm aware that he has been working on this paper, yes.
All right. Do you know what the status of it is?
No, I'm sorry, I can't inform you of the status at this time.
All right. Do you know whether it's gone through peer review or not?
I believe there has been some peer review on this document. I know that there certainly has been a lot of discussion in regard to this document.
All right. Are you, Ms. Farlinger, are you familiar with this document?
I was aware this document was being prepared, but I am not specifically familiar with its contents.
Without going to the actual content, are you aware of the kind of content that's supposed to be in it, what it is about?
To the best of my understanding, this is an assessment of different approaches for determining conservation status of conservation units. Let's try that.
And if that's the case, and the paper will speak for itself, of course, but with that understanding you have, what use would managers make of that paper as and when it's finalized?
Depending on the status of the paper, it could evolve at some point into recommendations about specifically how the status of a conservation unit would be assessed. At that point, we would receive that assessment if that were approved to go ahead under the scientific advice process. We would consider how and when and in what schedule we would incorporate it into management.
Into the management of the fishery?
Yes, into the management of the fishery.
All right, thank you. Commission Council was going to have this marked as an exhibit, and I think we might as well do that now.
On this document that we made on the document for Sue Grant, and that this is a draft, and it could therefore change under review. So the peer review normally will change the outcome of somewhat of the document. So I think there needs to be some caution to take that this is the final accepted document, because it is not.
All right, thank you. Yesterday, Ms. Farlinger, Mr. Eidsvik asked you some questions about what were then tabs 12, 13, and 14. And I think this remains outstanding. You were, as I understood it, going to go and look at your website and see if that helped you identify those documents. They're somewhere in the computer, and I'm sorry, Mr. Lunn, I can't point you to numbers.
Exhibits 1948 through 1950.
Thank you. Firstly, I should ask, did you have an opportunity to go and look at the website and or explore what Mr. Eidsvik had asked you about?
I did not have time to go through the documents specifically and determine exactly what they were.
All right, so you don't know any more today than you did yesterday?
That's correct.
All right, well, we'll leave it there then. Mr. Eidsvik asked you, Ms. Farlinger, about terminal fisheries in Shuswap Lake. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And as I recall your evidence, you said you weren't sure where they were. Do you know if there's even a terminal fishery at all in Shuswap Lake?
It's certainly near or around Shuswap Lake.
All right. And then Mr. Eidsvik went on to ask you about some of the impacts on, or of terminal fisheries on weak stocks. And as I understood the questioning, he was suggesting to you that terminal fisheries could adversely affect the weak stocks and that there isn't any protection against or for the weak stocks, no protection against that effect or for in favor of the weak stocks. And he was speaking in the context of the Adams fishery. My question of you is whether in designing terminal fisheries, does DFO take steps to ensure that the terminal fishery does not impact adversely weak stocks?
Certainly one of the major objectives of designing a terminal fishery is to reduce the impact or reduce the possibility of impact on weak stocks. It's one of the primary considerations in considering where a terminal fishery will take place.
All right. My second to last question, and Mr. McGowan in particular will be pleased that my last question should be very quick, is that my second to last, on Monday, Deputy Minister, Mr. McDade, Mr. McDade was asking you, Dr. Richards, not the deputy, some questions about studies to do with disease. And at page 68 of Monday's transcript, September 26, and I don't need it pulled up, I'll just read it. Mr. McDade asked, we didn't see any evidence of impacts of disease on the wild salmon, so we didn't do any studies about it. Would that be fair? And he's trying to get the gist of what your evidence was from a number of the panel members. And Deputy, you answered, I don't know, and said some other things. And then Dr. Richards further down, you said, I think we agree that this is an area where there hasn't been as much research as potentially some of the other areas, but you've asked us a very specific question within a broad area where I think that we could certainly do some more research. And then you say, so you're focusing on very specific research question within a suite of things where we could do more work. I'd like to give you the opportunity to expand on what you're referring to there by a suite of things we could do. What is the suite that either you're doing or could do?
Well, as I recall the question from Mr. McDade, Mr. Commissioner, I think he was very much focused, and I think it was that part where he was very focused on pathways of viruses as one specific example. And I think in that context, the pathways that we would look at for viruses would be similar to the pathways that we'd look at for other kinds of diseases, parasites, bacteria. And in that context, I think that we have done some other work. But I think we recognize in general that that there is more that we could do in the overall context of fish health, and that in fact we have undertaken some studies starting in 2009 to look more generally at the overall status of health of juvenile salmonids within the Strait of Georgia as a starting point and in the lower estuary. And we hope that those studies will provide us with a much better baseline to move forward.
All right. Thank you. 596. There we are. Page 2, please. This is the document that, let's see, Mr. Dixon maybe, Mr. Ralston was asking you about. You'll see there in the second paragraph, this document is not meant to be a statement of DFO or Government of Canada policy, rather it's a collection of best practices and so on. Ms. Farlinger, I'll ask you, is that an accurate statement then and still today?
Certainly in terms of what I've seen of this document, it is a collection of best practices, yes.
All right, thank you. And then finally, and this is not a question, it's a clarification, Mr. Commissioner, Exhibit 000, not to be confused with White Spot. is not something that warrants any privilege. It's, we're not sure what it is, but it's not privileged.
Thank you.
We know enough to know that it's not privileged. It's some kind of historical modeling or assumptions or trying things out, but it's not part of the privileged material.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Chris Buchanan on behalf of the PSAC. There was a document that was put to one of the witnesses by Mr. Taylor, and we would ask that that document be entered as an exhibit. That was the chart of the budget. And in fact, it may be helpful for the Commission to have the entire budget, which I supplied to Mr. Lunn. It will be important because I think the evidence given by one of the witnesses was inadvertently led astray by the actual questioning. So we would ask that the chart and the entire budget be put in.
Well, I brought up the document to assist Mr. Bevan in refreshing his memory. I don't think the numbers are particularly controversial, but they're not things that people carry around in their mind every day necessarily. And so that was the aim of bringing the document up. I don't think I marked it. I don't need it. It could be a document for ID, perhaps. Mr. Buchanan is now raising that somehow the question led the witness astray. I mean, he read what the number is on the document. I don't have, any I don't have a concern in terms of the content that the budget be marked. He wants the whole thing in. The budget is 700-800 pages. It's got appendices. It can deal with all kinds of stuff that will simply crash the Commission computer. And I'm really, in the interest of trying to manage the information load or overload here, suggesting that you don't want the entire budget document put before the Commission. It was there for a very limited purpose only.
I don't think it would crash the system, but we're content if the entire budget is marked for identification purposes and not as an exhibit.
I was wondering if it would be appropriate to ask that document marked for identification 000 be entered as an exhibit now, since Mr. Taylor has clarified that there's no privilege claimed over it.
Very well. 1973, is that correct?
That's correct. It will be 1973. And the last document?
I'm sorry, Mr. McGowan, do you have any position on marking for identification purposes the budget?
I'm not sure what utility it serves to have an $800-page, sure it's more than $800, excuse me. An 800-page document marked for identification, it's not going to be of any use to you in deliberating it. It's just going to sit there accomplishing nothing.
I'm only just going to add at this point that since Mr. Buchanan says my question led Mr. Bevan astray, I want to point out I've said 700, 800 pages. It's multi-hundred pages, but I'm not going to be held to its 800 as opposed to 900 or 600 or 2200. It's a big document.
I vote for whatever option is the most speedy resolution of this issue, Mr.
Speedy
Commissioner.
resolution will mark for identification the page that was put to Mr. Bevan for re-examination purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a few questions in re-examination, Mr. Commissioner. Ms. Dansereau, there were a number of questions put to you over the past few days about the wild salmon policy and funding and implementation. And one of the pieces of evidence that you gave to the Commissioner was that, in hindsight, were you redrafting this policy today, you would have it broken into two parts, both a policy part and a program part. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is one of the reasons that you would like portions of the policy that perhaps deal with implementation to be in a program, is that they would then carry with them a funding envelope?
Well, not necessarily, but they would carry with them, as it currently does, targeted money. So it would simply be a different way of managing it. And I can't go back to 2005 because I wasn't there, so I don't know what the thinking was. I do know that the very statement that says we will implement this within the resources that we have meant that very serious consideration had been given to the costing implications.
Well, let me ask you about that then, Deputy. You told Commission Counsel in your examination in chief that the department is fully committed to implementing the wild salmon policy. That was your evidence, correct?
Yes.
You answered one of the Commissioner's questions later in the week when he queried you about the original intention to implement the wild salmon policy within existing resources, that it wasn't as realistic as it could have been, and there was some naivety in the development of the policy. Taking those two statements together, and taking your representation that DFO is fully committed to implementing the wild salmon policy, your acknowledgement of the naivety in its development, do I take it that it follows that you now accept that some additional resources are going to have to be found to meet DFO's current commitment to implement the wild salmon policy in all of its component parts?
No, not necessarily, and because what I meant when I said that there was some naivete was that the timeframes that were included in the wild salmon policy were timeframes that would be difficult for us to implement, partly because of the difficulty in getting access to the real knowledge and the real science. And that is sometimes a question of money, but sometimes it's a question of timing in terms of when we develop a certain science or a certain bit of knowledge from science, it leads us into a different direction. So putting the absolute commitments around a time frame from us when we're dealing with science is a little bit, I think, being extra hopeful.
Okay, well, let's move then perhaps to an issue of time frames. Ms. Farlinger, you recall some questions put to you by Mr. Rosenblum about habitat status reports?
Yes. Yes.
And particularly about the habitat component of the wild salmon policy, and you accepted that it was a critical component of managing the stock. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And in response to his questions about how many of the habitat status reports had been completed, you said to the best of your knowledge that only the Harrison stock and the Fraser watershed, to your knowledge, had been completed. And in terms of the timetable, your evidence was that the timetable set out in the original policy was ambitious at best. Do you recall that?
Yes.
The timetable set out in the original policy with the funding as it was in 2005 was ambitious at best, and in the last 5 years, you've managed to accomplish only one habitat status report. In the context of today moving forward with the budget constraints that you're facing, what is a realistic timeline, not one that's ambitious at best, but a realistic timeline within which your department in the Pacific region can produce the habitat status reports required under the wild salmon policy?
It would be difficult to set out a specific timeline because of the fact we budget on an annual basis and because we have to balance the priorities of our work across all of our work, and we have to balance the priorities of the work on the wild salmon policy as to whether work on the strategy 1, 2, 3, 4 are more important to get done. So for that reason, setting a timeline on those is going to be very difficult and not something I think I could do at this point.
How long would the timeline have to be for you not to suggest that it was ambitious?
I think I would situate this in terms of my answer that we are implementing the wild salmon policy in its spirit and in accordance with the data requirements that are setting out as the data becomes important for us. One of the elements that we are looking at in order to move forward on the habitat side of the national program and therefore of the wild salmon policy is the review that we are currently undergoing about the habitat program and the habitat policy. I think the timelines associated with implementation of the habitat portions of the wild salmon policy will in some measure be contingent on the shape of the habitat program moving forward and the any refinements that may be made to the habitat policy.
So you can give the Commissioner no time frame, even in the most general terms, as to when he might expect the habitat work we were just discussing might be completed?
That's correct.
If we could have tab 11 of Mr. Harvey's documents, please. So just a brief question. Ms. Farlinger, you may be able to assist with the matter Mr. Harvey was hoping we could canvass. There's a document on the screen titled Pacific Salmon Treaty Economic Implications of Harvesting and Processing Reductions. Is this a document you're familiar with? I believe it's or anybody else on the panel?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
That's fine, very well. If the witnesses aren't familiar with it, I'll move on. Ms. Dancer, I want to come back to you with a couple of questions about the LaRock funding. With respect to Mr. Rosenblum's questions about the importance of test fishing and whether you'd support its continuation, At the conclusion of LaRock funding, your position, evidence to the Commissioner, was the evidence isn't in and we don't have answers yet. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Ryle testified before the Commission, and
Excuse me if I may.
Yes,
No,
certainly.
no, that's you. I think that's an. On that answer was specifically to LaRock funding and the LaRock program and whether or not we would be seeking continuation of that funding. But I also answered that in all indications, test fisheries have shown themselves to be important to this, and that if we couldn't find the funding under LaRock, we deemed that they would be fully important, then we would find funding elsewhere. So I didn't say that there's no evidence that test fisheries are not or important. I did say that the indications are that they are. But that we had to finish our evaluation of the whole program.
Right, and when you just gave your answer there, you said there, and if we determine they're important, we will find a way to continue them.
And that the findings couldn't be found some other way, and this is what we would always do. So yes, there are many indications to show that they are critical to the work that we're currently doing, but somebody might come to me at some point later and say we can find the same information doing something else. No one has thus far, but we do know that the information is important.
Is there any doubt in your mind as to the importance of test fishing to your fishery managers in terms of fulfilling their need to manage the stock on an in-season basis?
There's no doubt in my mind that the information that they currently provide is very important.
Okay. Are you committed to finding funding, whether it's through continuation of LaRock or some other process, to continue test fishing?
I am committed to finding funding to make sure we have the information we need on which to make decisions.
Is the test fishery, you heard Ms. Farlinger today refer to the test fishing as a key element. The evidence was put to you in chief of Mr. Ryle that it was extremely important, and I don't have the precise words he used, integral to gathering in-season information. In the context of that evidence, are you or are you not convinced that the specific aspects of test fishing must be continued moving forward?
For someone like me in the position that I am in, evidence must come in a variety of ways and not through a 5-minute conversation, even though this is a very serious conversation. I would have to receive a whole lot of advice from across the department, and at that point I would make a decision.
Yes, you're 5 years into the process of review with the temporary LaRock funding.
We're 5 years into the program. We are 1 year into the review. We are looking at the review right now.
So the review didn't commence until approximately 6 months.
The review of any program commences in its final year.
Thank you. I just have one final question for you, and it's for you, Mr. Bevan, and it was in response to some questions that were put to you about funding reductions and a concern that there may be a disproportionate distribution between operating expenses and salary dollars. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do.
And your response was, if I can summarize, well, no, we're not going to do that, have a bunch of people with no operating expenses. We will manage the distribution and the balance between attrition and retirement.
That's correct.
Okay. If DFO intends to maintain the balance between salary and operations through attrition and retirement, and as you move forward, there are the budget reductions and restrictions we've talked about, does this mean DFO is planning to address the budget decreases by having fewer scientists, fewer catch monitors, fewer fishery officers, or will it be distributed throughout all of those or some other areas?
It'll be distributed as decided upon by Cabinet, and when those announcements are made with the approval of the government, that'll be clear as to where they're going to take place. I would point out we have attrition rates that are above 5%, so we have some flexibility to look at issues, and we are looking at maintenance of frontline services of importance to Canadians, and dealing with areas where there's less priority, and those will be, once approved to be announced, made known.
Thank you for that, and thank you to each of the panel members. You've given a tremendous amount of time to the Commission. Mr. Commissioner, those are my questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McGowan. I'm sorry.
Mr. Commissioner, in terms of the budget document, you indicated that should be marked.
Just the page that was put to the witness, Mr. Johnson.
As an identification or a...
As an exhibit.
Exhibit.
I'm sorry, for identification purposes. My apologies.
That will be PPP, triple P.
Thank you. My apologies. Yes, I wanted to add to Mr. McGowan's remarks to the panel members the appreciation of the Commission. You've been here more than once, and the Commission is grateful for your attendance and for your answering the questions of Council. and thank you very much for that. I think Mr. Wallace, I think Mr. McGowan correctly said we would be adjourning Mr. Wallace, but you may just want to put that on the record. I mean adjourning to a date specific, not sine die.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just by way of adjournment, in as much as I have 2 minutes, I thought I would just like to record, if I may, that you have now heard 125 days of testimony from 173 witnesses. There have been 1,973 exhibits, 15 technical reports, 21 policy and practice reports, and more than 500 public submissions. That's the evidence which you now get to enjoy. And I'd like to express my thanks to you, Mr. Commissioner, and to all of the participants in council for the immense cooperation, flexibility, and professionalism that's been shown here over the last year. And this brings these evidentiary hearings more or less to a conclusion, but they're adjourned to November the 4th at 10 a.m.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallace. I just wanted to add just a few brief comments, if I could. Firstly, I wanted to thank, as Mr. Wallace has, the participants and the Participants' Council for the cooperation and respect you've shown to the process, and for the hard work that you have invested. The preparation was obvious on each and every day that I sat in this commission, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm under no illusions about how much pressure you're under, both time-wise and work-wise, and you really did rise to the occasion, and for that I shall be forever grateful, and I look forward to your submissions in due course, which I know will be immensely helpful, and I've learned a great deal from the process, thankfully, to your questions to the witnesses, and I'm sure I'll learn more from your submissions. I wanted to thank all of the members of the Commission legal staff. I don't see all of you outside of this hearing room, but I do see them and their work ethic, and I'm very, very grateful to each and every member of the legal team, the science folks who've been in our Commission staff, the entire Commission staff who back up everybody in terms of the paper load and the pressures on them to make sure everything is flowing. So I'm very grateful to all of them. To Mr. Giles, Mr. Lunn, and Ms. Keeley, I think you have expressed your appreciation to them. I must as well. They make this hearing run very smoothly. They're extremely cooperative and entirely reliable, and I'm grateful to them. They've been of great help to me and to Commission staff and to participants and to Participants' Council, so thank you to all of them. I note Mr. Giles is moving on to another project. He's shaking his head, but it's too late. He's committed to it. And Ms. Keeley, I believe, is not going to be with us on November the 4th. So to them, thank you very much. I wanted to thank the federal court staff. We were able to use these facilities through cooperation between our Commission Council and the staff here at the federal court. And we've been very fortunate to have this room for as long as we've had it. To Donna, who is there each day outside, to Mary, who you don't see, but she's behind the scenes, being extremely helpful to me and to others in terms of assisting us as we're over here and not in our own office. So thanks to them very much. And to the members of the public, of course, who came to our public forums, who've sent us written submissions, who've attended these hearings from time to time. They're the important parties to keep in mind. They are very interested in this process and very, very much part of the process. So I thank them. For me personally, it's been really a pleasure and a privilege to chair this commission. I have learned, as I said, a great deal about the fish, about the people who are reliant on the fish, and about its importance to Canadians. I think for me, the epiphany was not in this hearing room. It should have been, but it wasn't. It was, and some of you may have been there, on the weekend in the summer of 2010, when the fish returned in such abundance. I went out to Steveston, and I walked along the wharf with thousands of Canadians, and the buzz there was, I think, not even exceeded by the buzz during the Olympics, frankly. It was the excitement in the faces of all Canadians who were there, young and old. And it brought home to me the extreme importance of the topic we are all engaged in examining and investigating, and the privilege we have be part of the process. So thank you all very, very much. I look forward to seeing you on November the 4th. Thank you.
Made it.